The last normal thing I remember was the scent of lemon and thyme. Mom was preparing a marinade, her hands moving with a familiar, effortless grace in the soft light of the late afternoon. The kitchen island was a landscape of green herbs and yellow citrus, a small pocket of peace. My little brother, Philip, was sprawled on the living room floor, meticulously assembling a Lego spaceship, his tongue stuck out in concentration. Dad was in his study, the low murmur of his voice on a business call a constant, reassuring hum in the background of our lives. I had come home from school for the weekend, an unexpected trip. The quiet of our house was a welcome respite from the dorms. I dropped my bag by the stairs and went to the kitchen, stealing a slice of bell pepper from Mom's cutting board. She smiled without looking up. That was us, a series of small, unspoken moments that built a life. Vera, our housekeeper, was upstairs, the faint sound of the vacuum cleaner a part of the house's gentle rhythm. It was when the vacuum stopped that the silence felt different, not peaceful but empty. A void. I glanced at the clock on the oven. It was still afternoon. Dad's call had ended. Philip was now trying to explain the warp drive capabilities of his creation to me. I was only half listening, a strange unease prickling my skin. It was nothing I could name, just a feeling that a note was off-key in the symphony of our home. Then I saw him, a shape in the periphery, standing in the archway that led to the formal dining room. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was a man from the past, someone who had worked for my father's company. I remembered Dad mentioning he'd been let go. His name was a ghost in my memory, but his face was suddenly horribly real. He wasn't holding a weapon, not yet. He was just standing there, his presence sucking all the air and warmth from the room. Mom saw him a second after I did. Her hand froze over the bowl. Her smile vanished. Philip, oblivious, continued his monologue about plastic astronauts. "Savas," the man said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. It wasn't a question or a greeting, it was a summons. Dad appeared from his study, his face a mask of confusion that quickly hardened into something else, recognition and a flicker of fear. I didn't hear what was said next. My body moved before my brain caught up. I backed away slowly out of the kitchen, my stockinged feet silent on the hardwood floors. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Philip finally looked up, his bright, innocent face crumpling in confusion at the tableau of frozen adults. I saw the man's hand move, revealing something dark and metallic. I turned and fled up the stairs, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't scream. The sound was trapped somewhere deep in my chest. I scrambled into my old bedroom, the one kept pristine for my visits, and dove into the walk-in closet. I pulled the louvered door shut, leaving it open just a crack, and huddled in the far corner, behind a row of winter coats that still smelled of cedar and my mother's perfume. From my hiding place, the world became a muffled nightmare of sounds. I heard the man's calm, steady voice giving orders. I heard my father's voice tight with a desperate attempt at reason. I heard my mother's soft weeping, quickly silenced. I heard Philip let out a single, terrified cry. Then the sound of Vera being brought downstairs, heavy, dragging footsteps. I pressed my face into the thick wool of a coat, biting my lip to keep from making a sound. My own house had become a foreign country, and I was a refugee in a closet. The hours that followed were a blur of stretched-out time. Darkness fell outside the small window in my room, painting the walls in shades of gray and black. The house was mostly quiet. The intruder was patient. He was waiting for something. I could hear him moving around sometimes, his footsteps slow and deliberate on the floor below. I heard my father's voice strained on the phone. He was talking about money, a delivery, a wire transfer, a desperate negotiation for our lives. A sliver of hope, thin and fragile, rose in my chest. This was about money. They would get the money and he would leave. We would be shaken, but we would be alive. I clung to that thought as if it were a life raft. I regulated my breathing, forcing it to be slow and silent, even as my muscles screamed with tension. I thought about Philip. Was he scared? Was my mother holding him? Night deepened. The house was completely dark now, except for a single lamp I could see casting a long, distorted shadow from the hallway into my room. The waiting was the worst part. The silence was a canvas, and my mind painted it with unspeakable horrors. Every creak of the house, every distant siren in the city, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through me. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, I heard them being moved. Their footsteps were slow, shuffling. They were being taken upstairs, not to the master bedroom, but to the other side of the house, near Philip's room. I heard the man's voice, still dispassionately calm. He was giving instructions. I heard the sound of duct tape being unrolled, a series of soft thuds. I stayed rigid in my corner, a prisoner of fear. I couldn't move, I couldn't even cry. The tears were frozen in my ducts. My world had shrunk to this dark, cedar-scented box. The dawn came not with a song but with a weak gray light that felt like an intrusion. The ordeal had lasted through the night. The money, he must have been waiting for the banks to open. I heard my father's voice again on the phone. This time it sounded broken, defeated. After the call there was a long stretch of silence, a different kind of silence, the silence of a decision having been made. I must have drifted into a state that wasn't sleep but a numb exhaustion. I was startled back to full, terrifying awareness by a new smell. It was sharp, chemical. It slithered under the closet door, acrid and invasive. Gasoline. The hope I had been nurturing shriveled and died. This was never about the money, not just about the money. This was about erasure. Then the sounds started. I cannot and will not ever give them shape with words. They were not loud. They were muffled, intimate and final. A thud, a choked gasp, a heavy fall, one after another. I heard my father's name, a strangled cry from my mother, then Philip. He made a small sound, a child's sound. Then nothing. The silence that followed was the most profound sound I have ever heard. It was the sound of a world ending. My world, my family, extinguished in the rooms down the hall while I cowered behind coats. I pressed my hands over my ears, but I couldn't block it out. The sound was inside me now. I rocked back and forth, a silent primal scream trapped in my throat, threatening to tear me apart. Bile rose in my throat, hot and bitter. The smell of gasoline grew stronger, thicker. It was joined by the smell of smoke. A thin, gray tendril snaked under the closet door. The smoke alarm on the second floor began to shriek, a useless, belated warning. The fire was what saved me. The fire was what forced me to move. The primal instinct to survive, an instinct I thought had been pulverized by terror, finally took over. My body unlocked. I pushed the closet door open. The air in my bedroom was hazy, burning my eyes and lungs. I didn't look down the hallway. I couldn't. To look would be to see the closed doors behind which my family lay. I scrambled to the window, my hands fumbling with the latch. It was stuck. I slammed my palm against it again and again, a sob finally breaking from my lips. It finally gave. I threw the window open and sucked in a lungful of clean, cool morning air. I was on the second floor, looking down at the perfectly manicured azalea bushes my mother had been so proud of. It was too high to jump. My eyes darted around the room, landing on the sturdy oak desk by the wall. Adrenaline gave me a strength I didn't know I possessed. I shoved it, grunting with effort, until it was under the window. I climbed onto it, my legs trembling. The smoke was getting thicker, blackening the ceiling. I could hear the roar of the fire now, a living, hungry beast consuming my home, my memories. I swung my legs over the sill and hung there for a moment, my fingers gripping the edge. Then I let go. I landed in the azaleas, the branches scratching my arms and face, breaking my fall. I lay there for a second, stunned, the wet morning dew cold on my skin. Then I pushed myself up and ran. I ran across the damp lawn, my bare feet sinking into the soft earth. I didn't look back until I reached the wrought iron gates at the end of our driveway. I turned. The upper floor of my house was a furnace. Black smoke billowed into the pale morning sky, carrying with it the ashes of my life, my mother's kitchen, Philip's Legos, my father's study, them. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. A neighbor was shouting from their porch, but all I could hear was the silence from Philip's room. I survived, that is the word they use, but in the quiet of the night, when the ghosts of smoke and cedar visit me, I know the truth. A part of me, the most important part, burned away in that house. I am a body that walks and breathes, but my home, my family, myself, they all died that morning. I am merely the one left to listen to the echoes. The low hum of the television downstairs was the soundtrack to my evening. It was a familiar comfort, the murmur of some sitcom Mom was watching, punctuated by my sister Katie's occasional laugh. From my bedroom, the sounds were muffled, a soft bass line to the scratching of my pencil against notebook paper. March in Houston was already warm, and a faint breeze drifted through my open window, carrying the scent of cut grass from a neighbor's yard. It was a perfectly ordinary night, the kind you live 1,000 times and never remember. I was trying to solve a calculus problem that made no sense, my mind drifting. I could hear Mom moving around in the kitchen, the soft clinking of a glass being set on the counter. Katie was probably sprawled on the couch, feet tucked under her, phone in hand. At 13, her phone was a permanent extension of her arm. I imagined the scene so clearly I could almost see it. The lamp in the corner casting a warm, yellow glow, Mom's half-finished book on the end table. The comfortable, lived-in clutter of our home. Then the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the domestic quiet. It wasn't late, but it was late enough for an unexpected visitor to be unusual. I heard the TV volume go down. Mom's footsteps padded across the hardwood floor. I leaned back in my chair, listening without meaning to. The front door opened with a familiar squeak. A man's voice, friendly. I recognized it, though it took me a second to place. David Rayner. He was a guy from a few towns over, someone Dad knew from an old job. He'd been to the house for a barbecue once or twice. He always seemed nice enough, if a little awkward, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Carolyn, hey," I heard him say. His voice was too loud, too cheerful. "David, what a surprise." Mom's voice was polite, but I could hear the slight strain in it. The surprise wasn't entirely welcome. I turned back to my textbook, trying to force my brain to focus. Their conversation was a low drone, the words indistinct. It didn't concern me. I had a test to worry about, but the tone began to shift. It was subtle at first. David's cheerful pitch became more insistent. Mom's replies grew shorter, clipped. The easy rhythm was gone, replaced by something tense and jagged. I put my pencil down. The air in the house felt different, heavier. The sitcom was off now. The only sound was their voices. I couldn't make out the words, just the rising tension, like the pressure building before a storm. I heard Katie say something, her voice small and questioning. Then there was a noise, a heavy, ugly impact. It wasn't loud, but it felt wrong. It was followed by a sharp, choked-off cry from my mother. My blood turned to ice, every muscle in my body locked up. I was frozen in my chair, my ears straining, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. It was a fall. She must have tripped. That's what I told myself. She just tripped. But the silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. Then footsteps, heavy, not Mom's light tread or Katie's shuffle. A man's measured, heavy steps moving through our living room. My mind refused to connect the dots. It couldn't be David. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. The steps stopped, then started again, moving towards the base of the stairs. My paralysis broke. Survival, a primal instinct I never knew I possessed, took over. I didn't think, I just moved. I slid off my chair, my stockinged feet making no sound on the rug. My closet door was ajar. I slipped inside, pulling it shut until only a sliver of light remained. The space was cramped, smelling of laundry detergent and old sneakers. I crouched down, pressing myself back into the hanging clothes, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I tried to control my breathing, drawing in shallow, silent sips of air. The footsteps were on the stairs now, one at a time. A slow, deliberate ascent. Each tread on the wooden steps was a physical blow, vibrating through the floor, up my legs, into my chest. The house I knew, my sanctuary, was being violated. An alien presence was moving through it, claiming it. He reached the top of the landing. I could hear the floorboards outside my room groan under his weight. My gaze was locked on the thin line of light under the closet door. I saw a shadow fall across it as he paused. "Please, just keep walking. Go into my parents' room. Go anywhere but here." The doorknob to my bedroom turned. The door swung inward with a soft whoosh. Light flooded the crack beneath the closet door, and a pair of heavy work boots stepped into view. He was in my room. He was just feet away. I pressed my hand over my mouth, terrified that the sound of my own frantic pulse was loud enough to give me away. My lungs burned for air. He moved around the room. I heard the rustle of my bedsheets as he checked under the bed, the scrape of my desk chair being pulled out. He was looking for me. The realization hit me like a physical shock. He knew there was a son. He knew I was in the house. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to become invisible, to dissolve into the darkness of the closet. The shadows shifted as he moved closer. He was standing right in front of the closet now. I could hear his breathing, low and even, a chilling counterpoint to the chaos in my own chest. Time seemed to stop. The entire universe was reduced to this small, dark space, and the man standing just outside it. My life balanced on the flimsy latch of a closet door. For an eternity he stood there, then he moved on. The shadow receded. The bedroom door closed, and the heavy footsteps receded down the hall. A wave of relief so intense it made me dizzy washed over me, but it was short-lived. He wasn't gone, he was just done with my room. I heard him go into my parents' bedroom, then Katie's. The sounds were muted, drawers being pulled open, objects being knocked over, a dispassionate, methodical search, and through it all, a horrifying silence from downstairs, a silence where my mother's voice should have been. Then I heard Katie. Her voice was a thin, terrified whimper. "Please," just one word. It came from downstairs. He must have gone back down. The sound sliced through me, a pain sharper than any blade. She was alive, and she was with him. I heard his voice, a low, menacing rumble. I couldn't understand the words, but the intent was clear. It was not the voice of the friendly acquaintance who had come to our barbecue. It was the voice of a monster. There was a muffled sound, a struggle, a sob cut short. And then nothing. The silence that followed was the most profound sound I have ever heard. It was a vacuum, a void where my sister's life had just been. I crouched in the dark, tears streaming silently down my face, a scream trapped in my throat, choking me. Guilt was a physical weight, crushing my bones. I was here, hiding, safe in a dark closet while my sister. I didn't know how much time passed. Seconds felt like hours. Every creak of the old house was him coming back for me. Every distant car horn was a sign of his return. I stayed folded into myself, a knot of terror and grief. Eventually, I heard the front door open and close. The sound of a car engine starting, then fading into the distance. He was gone. But I didn't move. I couldn't. My body refused to obey. What if it was a trick? What if he was waiting outside, listening for any sign of life? So I waited in the dark. The house settled around me, groaning and sighing as it always did, but now the familiar sounds were sinister. They were the sounds of an empty place, a tomb. The darkness in the closet was complete now. Night had fully fallen outside. I had no idea how long I had been in there. My legs were cramped and numb. My throat was raw from unshed screams. Finally, a new fear began to surface, a fear that was worse than hiding, the fear of what I would find when I came out. With trembling hands, I pushed the closet door open. It swung without a sound. My room was as I had left it, but it felt desecrated, alien. Moonlight streamed through the window, painting everything in pale, ghostly stripes. I forced myself to move. My legs were stiff, clumsy. I crept out of my room and into the hallway. The house was still and silent. I stood at the top of the stairs, my hand hovering over the railing, my gaze fixed on the darkness below. I had to go down. I had to know. I took the first step, then another. Each one was an act of will. The living room was bathed in the cold, blue light of the television, which had been left on, muted. It cast long, dancing shadows across the walls. The first thing I saw was the overturned end table, its contents scattered across the floor. A lamp lay on its side, the bulb shattered. Then I saw my mother. She was on the floor by the entryway, still and silent in a way that sleep could never be. My mind simply refused to process it. It was like looking at a mannequin, something that only resembled the vibrant, living woman who had made me breakfast that morning. I backed away, a low sound of denial escaping my lips. My eyes scanned the room, searching for Katie, hoping, praying that she had somehow gotten out, that she was hiding, just as I had been. I found her near the couch. And the world ended. The floor fell away, the air was sucked from my lungs. The scream I had been holding back finally tore itself from my throat, but it was soundless, a hollow, gaping agony. My vision tunneled. Everything went gray and indistinct around the edges. I don't remember getting to the phone. I don't remember dialing. I only remember the voice of the operator, calm and distant, a voice from another planet, asking me questions my shattered mind couldn't answer. I stumbled out the front door and onto the lawn. The night air was cool on my skin. I collapsed onto the grass, the damp blades cold against my cheek. The streetlights cast their ordinary orange glow on the quiet suburban street. A dog barked somewhere down the block. A car drove by, its occupants oblivious. The world was still turning. I lay there staring up at the impassive stars, my home a dark, silent shape behind me. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene. I had survived. But I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I had left the most important parts of myself behind in that silent house, hidden away in the dark. The silence was the first thing, not a peaceful quiet, but a thick, heavy absence of sound that pressed in on all sides. The air in my room was still, carrying a faint, metallic scent that I couldn't place. It clung to the back of my throat. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, listening to the house settle around me. The usual nighttime symphony, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant groan of the pipes was gone, replaced by this suffocating stillness. I needed to move. My limbs felt leaden, disconnected from my thoughts. I stood, my bare feet cold against the polished wood floor. The door to my room was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped into the upstairs landing. The security gate at the top of the stairs stood open, its metal bars glinting in the low light from the window. That was wrong. It was always locked at night, always. A story began to form in my mind, a skeletal framework I could build upon. An intruder. It had to be an intruder. Someone came in. I crept towards my brother's room. His door was wide open. Inside, the scene was a chaotic tableau. The duvet was a tangled heap on the floor. My brother, Rudy, was on his bed, but not in a way that suggested sleep. He was unnaturally still. A dark, wet stain was spreading across the white sheets beneath his head. My gaze followed a trail of it down the wall. Standing over him was a shape, a shadow that resolved into my father. He was holding an axe. No, that wasn't right. The story was wrong. I rewound the thought, edited it. My father was on the floor beside the bed. The axe was near him. He was trying to protect Rudy. Yes, that made sense. They fought him. They fought the intruder. I backed away from the doorway, my breath catching in my chest. My own heartbeat was a frantic drum against my ribs. It was a good detail, a believable physical reaction. I would remember that. My parents' bedroom was next. The door was closed. I put my hand on the knob, the cool brass a stark contrast to my suddenly slick palm. I turned it slowly, the latch making a small, dry sound in the immense quiet. My mother was on the bed. My father was there too, on the floor between the bed and the door. The image from Rudy's room superimposed itself, a confusing, overlapping memory. I shook my head to clear it. It didn't matter. The result was the same. The scene was what mattered. The coppery smell was stronger here, overpowering. I could taste it. I did not go in. I closed the door with the same slow precision I had used to open it. I needed to find Marley, my sister. Her room was at the end of the hall. Her door was also open. She was a heap on the floor, tangled in her own bedding, which must have been dragged from her bed. Her breathing was a terrible, wet, rasping sound. It was the only sound in the entire house, and it was a violation of the silence. She was alive, a problem, but also an opportunity, a witness, a fellow victim. The story needed another victim, one who survived. I knelt beside her, my knees pressing into the soft carpet. I didn't touch her. I just watched the slight, labored rise and fall of her back. The story now had its pieces. A brutal attack, my father, mother, and brother gone, my sister gravely injured, and me, the survivor, the one who had to call for help. I stood and walked back down the hallway, past the rooms, past the still figures within them. I had to make the scene perfect. I went downstairs. The kitchen was pristine except for the back door, which was ajar. That's how he got in, a detail, important. I looked around for something else, a wallet on the counter, a purse on a chair. I took the cash from the wallet and tossed it on the floor. He was a thief. It was a robbery gone wrong. My own part in the drama was next. I went to the bathroom off the kitchen. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide. I looked like I was in shock. It was a convincing performance, even to myself. I needed injuries, not like theirs, just enough to be plausible. A struggle. I remembered the knife block on the kitchen counter. I selected a small paring knife. The blade was cold. I drew it across my forearm, not too deep, just enough to break the skin. The line of red that welled up was surprisingly bright. I did it again on my side, through my shirt. The fabric tore. Perfect. I dropped the knife on the kitchen floor. He must have dropped it as he fled. Now the phone. I retrieved my mobile from the living room where I'd left it charging. My hands were shaking, whether from adrenaline or fear or the simple, chilling act of what I was doing, I couldn't be sure. It didn't matter. Shaking hands were good. They were authentic. I found the emergency number. I rehearsed the words in my head. My family has been attacked. Please send help. Desalt's estate, 12 Gosk Street. I needed to sound dazed, confused, not hysterical. Hysteria could make my words unclear. Clarity was paramount. I pressed the call button. The operator's voice was calm, professional. It grounded me. I delivered my lines. I described the scene in disjointed fragments, an attacker, an axe, blood. I kept my voice low and near monotone, punctuated by breaths that I made sure sounded ragged. She asked if I was the patient. I told her about my family. I told her about my superficial wounds. I think I giggled, a strange, inappropriate sound. Shock can do that. It was another good detail. After the call, I waited. The silence returned, now filled with a new tension, the anticipation of sirens. I sat on the bottom step of the staircase, my head in my hands. I thought about the axe. Where was it now? I had left it downstairs. It was an expensive, beautifully crafted tool my father kept for chopping firewood. Now it lay on the Persian rug, its polished head stained. I looked at my self-inflicted cuts. They were bleeding sluggishly. I pressed a dish towel from the kitchen against the one on my arm. I thought about what the police would ask. What did he look like? He wore a mask, a balaclava. What did he sound like? I didn't hear him speak. Why did he attack you? I don't know. Money. It was for money. Why did he leave you alive? I fought back. I took the knife from him. He ran. The narrative felt solid, a fortress of lies built on a foundation of carnage. The distant wail of sirens grew steadily louder, cutting through the manicured peace of the estate. I felt a surge of something that might have been relief. The performance was about to begin for its intended audience. The first responders were a blur of uniforms and equipment. They swept into the house, their movements efficient and purposeful. They told me to stay put while they went upstairs. I heard their sharp, indrawn breaths, their muted, professional exchanges. They didn't need to tell me what they found, I already knew. They brought Marley down on a stretcher. Her face was covered in blood, but I could see her eyelids flutter. She was still fighting. They worked on her with a quiet urgency before carrying her out to the ambulance. One of them, a paramedic, came over to me. He looked at my arm, his expression unreadable. He cleaned the cut and wrapped it in a clean white bandage. His touch was gentle, impersonal. Then came the police. They were different. Their eyes lingered. They looked at me, then at the room, then back at me. They saw the pristine security estate, the high walls, the lack of forced entry on the windows. They saw the expensive electronics left untouched. They saw my superficial wounds, so starkly different from the devastating injuries upstairs. I was taken to the hospital, then to the police station. I told my story. I told it again and again. Each time I tried to keep the details consistent. The balaclava, the axe, the guttural sounds the intruder made, my desperate fight for the knife, my escape. I described the man. He was tall, but not too tall, broad-shouldered. He wore dark clothes, gloves, always mentioned the gloves, no fingerprints. I described the terror, the confusion, the feeling of the axe whistling past my head. I painted a picture of a random, brutal home invasion. But their questions became more pointed. They asked about the security system. I explained it was on, but he must have known how to bypass it. They asked why nothing of significant value was stolen. I said he must have been scared off when I fought back. They asked about the axe. It was our axe. He must have found it in the scullery. They kept coming back to my injuries, so minor, so clean. They measured the cuts, photographed them. They talked about hesitation marks. I didn't know what that meant, but the tone of their voices told me it wasn't good for my story. Days turned into weeks. I was the sole witness, the grieving son and brother. I played the part. I attended the funerals, standing numbly as dirt was shoveled onto 3 coffins. I sat by Marley's hospital bed, watching her slow, painful return to a world she wouldn't remember. The doctors said she had retrograde amnesia. She couldn't be a witness. She couldn't contradict my story. A small, cold part of me was grateful for that. But the fortress I had built was beginning to show cracks. The police were methodical. They analyzed the blood spatter patterns on my clothes, on the walls. They downloaded the data from my phone. They noted the long delay between the time of the attacks and my call to emergency services. They pointed out the unnatural calm in my voice during that call. I told them it was shock. It's what anyone would say. They found no foreign DNA in the house, no unidentified fingerprints, no muddy footprints from an intruder. Everything they found belonged to the 5 of us. The evidence didn't point to someone coming in from the outside. It pointed inward. The suspicion was a tangible thing, a change in the atmosphere whenever I entered a room. The sympathetic looks from friends and family were replaced by guarded, questioning glances. The detectives' questions were no longer about an intruder, they were about me. They asked about my relationship with my family. They asked about arguments, about money. I was no longer the victim, I was a person of interest. Then, I was the primary suspect. The world I had known, the life of privilege and ease, had been obliterated that night. I had intended to destroy my family, but keep the world they had built for me. I had thought I could control the narrative, that my version of events would be the only one, but the truth has its own weight. It doesn't scream. It just sits there, a dense, immovable object, and waits. It waits in the silence of a house. It waits in the patterns of blood on a wall. It waits in the memory of a sister who cannot speak. And now it waits for me. I am the lone survivor, just as I planned. I am alive, breathing, walking, but the silence from that night never left. It followed me out of the house, and it has been my constant companion ever since. It's a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that comes after the last sound has been made and there is nothing left to say. The silence of the apartment was a luxury, a thick blanket settling over Paris late at night. The city hummed a distant, muted song below my window, but up here in this private residence they called a hotel, there was only the soft whisper of the air conditioning and the faint scent of lilies from a vase in the hall. I was wrapped in a bathrobe, the day's makeup scrubbed from my face, my hair pulled back. The frantic energy of Fashion Week had finally ebbed, leaving behind a pleasant exhaustion. I was scrolling through my phone, a mindless ritual, when I heard it. Heavy footfalls on the wooden stairs. They were not the light, hurried steps of staff or the familiar tread of my assistant. This was a slow, deliberate, and heavy sound, more than one person. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. I sat up, straining my ears, trying to place the sound in the context of a hotel, trying to rationalize it away. a maintenance issue, late arrivals, but the sound was inside the residence, not out in the main building's corridor. It was coming up my stairs. I slid off the bed, my bare feet were cold against the floor. A sliver of light from the hallway cut across the bedroom carpet. I saw shadows move within it, large and distorted. My breath caught in my throat. This was not right. This was impossible. The security, the concierge, the locked doors. Then the bedroom door swung open. Two men stood there, their forms silhouetted against the hall light. They wore what looked like police jackets, but their faces were obscured by black ski masks. A third, and then a fourth and fifth, crowded in behind them. My mind refused to process the image. It felt like a scene from a movie, surreal and detached. One of them held a gun. The metal caught the dim light, a cold and indifferent gleam. My blood turned to ice water. My throat closed, and the scream I wanted to let out died before it could form a sound. They spoke in French, harsh and rapid. I only caught fragments, words I knew but couldn't string together in my panic. My mind was a blank slate of pure, unadulterated terror. They moved toward me, their steps purposeful. I backed away until my legs hit the edge of the bed and I fell back onto the mattress. One of them was on me in an instant, his gloved hands grabbing my arms. The fabric of his jacket was coarse against my skin. The other one held the gun, not pointed directly at my head, but held low, an ever-present threat. He barked a word at me, a question. I just shook my head, unable to speak, unable to think. All I could think about were my children, miles away, safe in their beds. A part of my brain, a cold and analytical part, started calculating. They are going to rape me. They will rape me and then they will kill me, and my babies will have to grow up hearing the story of how their mother was murdered in a hotel room in Paris. The thought was so clear, so certain, that a strange calm washed over the panic. If this was it, I would not fight. I would not scream. I just wanted it to be over. He grabbed my phone from the nightstand and threw it aside. Then he repeated the word, louder this time, more insistent. La bague, the ring. My eyes darted to my hand. The diamond, a heavy weight I wore without thinking, now felt like a spotlight, a beacon. I understood. It was about the jewelry, not me, just the things. A flicker of hope, tiny and fragile, sparked in the darkness of my mind. They were yelling now, and one of them produced a roll of packing tape and plastic zip ties. While one held the gun, the other two pulled my hands behind my back. The plastic of the ties bit into my wrists, cinching down with a series of sharp clicks. The pain was immediate and searing. I tried to tell them where the jewelry box was, tried to form the words, but my tongue was thick and useless. One of them pushed me forward, face down onto the bed. He pulled my ankles together and secured them with another tie. I was bound, helpless. He then tore off a long strip of tape and pressed it firmly over my mouth. The chemical smell of the adhesive filled my nostrils. Another piece went over my eyes. Now there was only darkness, the muffled sounds of their voices, and the pounding of my own heart. They dragged me off the bed. I landed hard on the floor, the impact jarring my teeth. They pulled me by my bound arms, my body scraping against the rug. The destination was the bathroom. The air grew colder and I could feel the smooth, hard tile beneath my cheek when they dropped me. The door slammed shut, the sound echoing in the small space. I heard the lock turn. And then I was alone in the dark. The sounds from the other room were muted but distinct, the scrape of drawers being pulled open, the thud of heavy objects being overturned. They were ransacking the place. Every sound sent a fresh wave of fear through me. Were they finding everything? Would they be satisfied? Or would they come back for me when they were done? My cheek was pressed to the cold marble floor. I could feel the grout lines. I focused on that, the physical sensation, trying to anchor myself. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and fast behind the tape. I forced myself to slow it down. Inhale, exhale, thinking of my children again, their faces, their laughter. I had to survive this. I could not leave them. Time ceased to exist. It was an endless stretch of darkness, punctuated by the sounds of destruction from the other room and the frantic monologue in my own head. I replayed every security decision, every social media post, every choice that had led me to this moment, alone and bound on a bathroom floor in a foreign country. I thought about my husband sleeping an ocean away, unaware. I thought of my sister just a few blocks away in another hotel. No one knew. No one was coming. I began to work my hands, twisting them, rubbing my slick skin against the sharp edges of the plastic ties. The friction was creating a raw burn, but I ignored it. I had to get free. The sounds outside were quieting down. That was worse. The silence was worse than the noise. Did it mean they were done, or were they waiting, listening? My heart hammered against my ribs. I kept working my hands, feeling the skin break, the warm slickness of blood aiding my efforts. One hand finally slipped through. The release of pressure was dizzying. Pain shot up my arm, but I had one hand free. I fumbled with the ties on my ankles, my fingers clumsy and numb. It took an eternity, but I finally managed to pull it loose. Then I reached up and ripped the tape from my face. The sharp sting was a relief. I took a deep, shuddering breath of the cool bathroom air. Silence. Complete and total silence from the other side of the door. My body was trembling, a violent, uncontrollable tremor. I stayed on the floor, listening. Was it a trick? Were they standing right outside the door, waiting for me to emerge? I waited. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Nothing. Slowly, shakily, I got to my feet. I leaned against the wall, my legs weak. I turned the lock on the door. It made a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the stillness. I pushed the door open a crack. The bedroom was destroyed. Clothes were strewn everywhere, drawers were hanging open, the mattress was askew, and it was empty. I stumbled out of the bathroom, across the ruined bedroom, and onto the small balcony. My assistant was staying in an apartment downstairs. I leaned over the railing, my voice a raw croak. I called her name, again and again. Lights flicked on below, a window slid open. Her face appeared, etched with confusion and then dawning horror. Help arrived, first her, then security, then the real police, the ones without masks. The apartment filled with people, with urgent, hushed voices speaking French and English. They wrapped me in a blanket. They asked me questions I could not answer. My mind was a fog. I could only see the glint of the gun, feel the bite of the plastic ties. The flight home was a blur. I remember the gray light of dawn over the Atlantic, the hum of the engines, a constant drone. I didn't sleep. Every shadow in the cabin looked like a man in a mask. Every unexpected noise made me flinch. Back home, in the familiar embrace of my own house, the fear did not recede. It followed me. It lived in the quiet moments, in the sound of a closing door, in the darkness of a room after the lights are turned out. Security guards now stood at every entrance, but the walls felt thin, penetrable. They had taken the stones, the gold, millions of dollars worth of inanimate objects, but what they had truly stolen was the quiet, the belief that a locked door was enough. They took the silence I had enjoyed on that Paris night and filled it with the memory of heavy footfalls on a wooden staircase, a memory that would likely never fade. The last normal night of my life, I slept on a lumpy couch at my friend Kevin's house, the air thick with the smell of stale pizza and the low drone of a video game I had no interest in. I was supposed to be over at Uncle Chris's place. There was always something going on there, a bonfire or someone fixing up a demolition derby car. But I wanted a night away from the family, just for once. A single night of feeling like a regular kid, not just another rodent in a county full of them. That decision is a ghost that sits on my chest every morning I wake up. The sun was barely up when Kevin's mom shook my shoulder. Her face was pale, her expression tight and wrong. She held a phone out to me. It was my mother. Her voice was a sound I had never heard before, a thin, splintered thing. She wasn't crying, which was somehow worse. It was the sound of someone who had gone past tears into a place of pure, cold shock. She told me there had been an incident at Chris SR's. I needed to come home. The drive back was a blur of green trees and gray asphalt. The word incident echoed in my head. It could mean anything, a fire, a fight that got out of hand. I imagined police cars, maybe an ambulance. I was not prepared for the reality. We couldn't even get down our own road. It was blocked by a line of sheriff's cruisers, their lights painting silent, strobing colors on the morning mist. Yellow tape stretched between the trees, a flimsy barrier against an unimaginable horror. A deputy I'd known my whole life, a man who once bought me a soda at the county fair, stopped my mom's car. He looked at me, then looked away, his jaw working. He spoke to my mom in a low voice I couldn't catch. I saw her body fold in on itself, a quiet collapse. The world outside the car windows went silent and slow. I got out and walked toward the tape, a stupid, numb impulse. The deputy put a hand on my arm. His grip was gentle but absolute. He said I couldn't go up there. I could see the top of Chris SR's trailer through the woods. It looked the same as it always did, a place of loud music, grease-stained hands, and easy laughter. I kept thinking I would hear his truck start up, that he would come barreling down the drive, wondering what all the fuss was about. But there was only the murmur of official voices and the crackle of radios. Bits and pieces of the nightmare started to filter down the hill. Whispers from other family members who began to arrive, their faces masks of confusion that slowly crumbled into disbelief. They weren't just at Chris's, they were at Gary's too. Something had happened at Dana's, at Kenneth's. The names were a roll call of my world. Uncle, aunt, cousins, my family. The word shot was passed from person to person, a venomous secret that poisoned the air. I saw them bring a baby out of one of the houses, a tiny thing alive wrapped in a blanket, then another, and a third, A flicker of impossible hope ignited in my chest, only to be extinguished by the chilling question that followed: why only the children? The day bled into a long, formless twilight of grief. No one told me everything at once. It came in brutal, staggered blows. Chris SR and his brother Gary, Dana and her children Hannah and Chris JR, Kenneth, Frankie and his fiancée Hannah, 8 people. They used the word executed. A word from movies, not from the quiet hills of Pike County. They said they were killed in their sleep. My mind couldn't grasp it. I tried to picture Dana's trailer, a place I'd eaten dinner 100 times, and all I could see was her laughing, a pot of chili on the stove. I tried to think of my cousin Hannah and saw her holding her little girl, her face full of a fierce, protective love. The images were so vivid, so alive, that they made the truth feel like a lie. The following days were a thick fog. Our homes, once places of refuge, became public property. News vans lined the roads, their satellite dishes pointed at our sky. Strangers with cameras tried to talk to us, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Detectives asked questions I couldn't answer. Who would do this? Did the family have enemies? I looked at their stoic, professional faces and wanted to scream that my family weren't characters in a crime report. They were people who loved and fought and worked hard and were now just gone. Survivor's guilt is not a sharp pain, it's a dull, constant weight. I replayed my decision to go to Kevin's house over and over. What if I had been there? Would I have heard something? Would I have been the ninth? The question was a poison I drank every night before falling into a restless sleep filled with dark houses and silent rooms. The investigation stretched on. Weeks turned into months, months into a year, then 2. The yellow tape came down, but the properties remained empty, sealed. Weeds grew high around the trailers. The world moved on, but we were frozen in that single horrific night. Speculation was rampant, cartels, a drug deal gone wrong. The theories were wild, impersonal, and somehow easier to stomach than the truth. The idea of a faceless monster is terrifying, but the idea of a monster you know is a different kind of horror altogether. We had known the Wagners for years. They were friends. More than friends, they were intertwined with us in that way that happens in small towns. Their son Jake had been with Hannah. They had a child together, Sophia. I remembered backyard cookouts. I remembered their mother Angela, always present, always watching. I remembered their father Billy, a quiet man. I remembered their other son George, always trailing his brother. They were just people, part of the landscape of our lives. They even came to the funerals. I saw them there, their faces grim. They offered condolences. When the news of their arrests broke, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a final, sickening betrayal. The motive, when it came out, was so small, so petty. It was an insult to the scale of the loss, a custody dispute. They didn't want to share a child, so they decided to erase an entire branch of a family tree. The investigators laid it all out, a meticulous, cold-blooded plan. They bought shoes from Walmart they could throw away. They built silencers for their guns. They studied our family's routines, our habits. They knew who slept where. They came in the dead of night, moving from house to house under the cover of darkness and familiarity. They walked past family pictures on the walls, past toys on the floor, and methodically ended the lives of people who had trusted them. The image that haunts me most is of Dana. They said she was killed in her bed with her children in the room. Little Chris JR and Hannah, who had just given birth to her own baby days before. They shot her and then they shot her children. And in the same trailer, they left the babies, including Hannah's newborn, alive, untouched. What kind of mind does that? What kind of soul spares an infant after murdering its mother? It wasn't mercy. It was a statement. It was about possession. The child was a prize they were claiming. I attended some of the court proceedings. I had to see them. I watched Jake Wagner plead guilty, his face blank as he described the slaughter in a flat, monotone voice. He spoke of my family members not as people, but as obstacles that had been removed. There was no remorse in his eyes, just the chilling emptiness of a man who believed he was entitled to do what he did. I watched his brother George and his parents, Angela and Billy, try to lie and deflect, their family bond a toxic alliance built on a foundation of murder. The legal system ground on, delivering verdicts and sentences, life in prison, the possibility of death row. But for me, for the rest of my family, there's no closure. You cannot close the door on a void. You just learn to live around it. Sometimes I drive the old roads past the properties. The trailers are gone now, torn down. The land is slowly being reclaimed by nature. Wildflowers grow where Dana's front porch used to be. The gravel driveway to Chris SR's place is almost invisible under a blanket of grass. It's quiet, peaceful even, but I can't feel the peace. For me, these patches of land will forever be crime scenes. They are hollowed out places, haunted by the echoes of what happened in the dark. I survived, that's the fact, but survival feels like a technicality. A part of me died that night with them. The part that believed in the safety of home, the trust of a neighbor, the simple goodness of the world. That part is buried with them in a quiet Ohio cemetery, under a sky that looks no different than it did on the last normal day of my life.